I don't know what's happening outside those windows. Sunspots, gamma rays, the radiation belt, as Eli Drinkwitz mentioned during his opening address, his attempt to be Shane Gillis on the last day of SEC Media Days. We're going to see if we can get through this, if the weather will cooperate. I don't know. Maybe Bear Bryant is not happy from beyond the grave, not that far from where I sit. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. We are in a post SEC Football Media Days edition of Scarbo Knows with executive producer Brendan Martin. And we have to focus on Alabama because I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, and that is the topic du jour about, 365 days a year around here when it's not Auburn football, when Auburn basketball and Alabama basketball aren't making runs at the Final Four. And this just in, we have some breaking news. The SEC Media Days poll is hot off the presses, and it might be depressing to some Alabama fans. There were 11 different schools, by the way, that were given at least one first-place vote. I'm not sure who the joker was who picked Auburn to win the SEC this year. Maybe they'll be brilliant and the rest of us will look foolish. I think not. But no surprise that Texas was the overwhelming choice to win the SEC championship this year. They were far ahead of Georgia. Texas got 96 of the 200-plus first-place votes. Georgia got 44. Alabama came in third at 29. Not where you expect to see an Alabama team in the preseason poll, the postseason poll, or any poll in between. Kalen DeBoer did get Alabama to number one in the country last year. They did beat Georgia, and they did beat Auburn, which wasn't a tall order at the end of last season. But the real question is, or the question was at SEC Media Days on Wednesday when Kalen DeBoer made his appearance in the main media room on the football field at the College Football Hall of Fame was, first of all, we'll get to the present and future in a second. Let's look back at his first year. Did Alabama live up to the Alabama standard, not to be confused with the Ohio State University, in year one under Kalen DeBoer? That was the question. And Kalen DeBoer used about 150 words to answer that question. Now, we're not going to go through it here. We're not going to read through it here. But the very thought that it took him 150 words to answer the question, look, the real answer to the question, the first thing he said was, in which way? To which I would have said, in every possible way. Every conceivable way, Alabama failed to live up to the Bama standard in year one. But let's take the blank words or the dry words on a blank page out of it. Let's hear what Kalen DeBoer himself had to say on the subject. First of all, thanks to AL.com for the clip of Kalen DeBoer at Media Days. Brendan, I have to ask, I couldn't hear his audio through my headset. Could our audience hear his audio through their headsets or live? I'm not sure. I hope you were able to hear Kalen DeBoer. And again, he took a lot of words to answer that question when Look, we all know what the answer is. The answer is no. Well, that's the short answer. The longer answer is heck no. Next question. Yes, it was nice of Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, when he was introducing Kalen DeBoer in Atlanta, to point out that Kalen DeBoer became the first Alabama first-year coach to win 9 games since Frank Thomas in 1931. And if you're keeping score at home, that was 2 years before the SEC began. Frank Thomas, of course, won a national championship at Alabama. He has a statue outside Bryant-Denny Stadium. He's the first statue in a long line. But he only won 9, and he went 9-1 in 1931. For Kalen DeBoer to win 9, that is clearly not the Bama standard in 2025. It hasn't been since 2008, Nick Saban's second year. He struggled at first, but clearly he got things turned around in a hurry. In that second year, Alabama went undefeated in the regular season, got to number 1 in the country, played Florida in the SEC championship game, and Alabama actually led that game going into the fourth quarter. And then Tim Tebow did Tim Tebow things and led the Gators from behind, and they won their second national championship in 3 years. And we know what happened a year later. Alabama got its revenge and made Tim Tebow cry and went on to win Alabama's first national championship in 17 years. So the standard has been very, very high in Tuscaloosa ever since. And no, going 9-4, not making the college football playoff, that does not live up to the Bama standard. Let's look at some of the highlights, or maybe lowlights, if you will, from Kalen DeBoer's first season in Tuscaloosa. As I mentioned, 9-4 was the record. That was the first 4-loss season for the Crimson Tide since 2007. That was Nick Saban's first year on campus. Alabama suffered its first loss to Vanderbilt since 1984. Ray Perkins was the coach of the Crimson Tide at that time in his second year. And of Alabama's 4 losses in their 9-4 season, 3 of them came against unranked opponents. And here is one of the most amazing stats of the Nick Saban era. From 2008, Saban's second year, through his final season in 2023, Alabama suffered a grand total of 1 losses to unranked opponents. It came against Texas A&M in 2021. Think about that. In 16 years, Alabama lost once to an unranked opponent. In his entire Alabama career, if you include his first year, Alabama actually lost 3 times to unranked opponents in Nick Saban's first year. So DeBoer is on par with Saban there. But over Saban's 17 years, 123-4 against unranked opponents. And Nick Saban didn't inherit the program from Nick Saban. He inherited the program from Mike Shula, whose standard was much lower, or whose performance was much lower. His standard was the same. He didn't live up to it at all, and his performance was well below it. So Kalen DeBoer, following Nick Saban and going 9-4 with a returning quarterback in Jalen Milroe, a superstar freshman who, in case you weren't aware, I don't think anyone brought this up at the time, was 17 years old, Ryan Williams. And they did some pretty amazing things, especially early in the season. Go back to that Georgia game. That's living up to the Bama standard. That's living up to the Nick Saban standard by beating Georgia, as is beating Auburn. Alabama's now won 5 straight Iron Bowls. But losing 4 games, losing to Vanderbilt 40-35, when your defense could not get off the field, that's not the Bama standard. Losing to Oklahoma when your offense couldn't find the end zone and falling 24-3, that's not living up to the Bama standard. And then losing to a Michigan team in a bowl game that was unranked as well, was missing any number of its regulars and putting on an absolutely putrid offensive performance, that's not the Bama standard either. So the real question is, look, you get a pass in year one. As I said, there's something different about Alabama. It is a fishbowl unlike any other. And I don't care where you've coached before. Unless you've played there, you have an idea. But if you're coming in from the outside, like Nick Saban did in 2007, like Kalen DeBoer did a year ago, you hear about it. People can tell you about it. They can paint you a picture. You can read stories. But until you experience it, you don't understand it. And you don't truly become the Alabama football coach until you lose a football game. And that happened the week after Georgia a year ago when Alabama moved to number 1 in the country and everybody was riding high. And then they went to Nashville and Diego Pavia put a stop to that. So the real question isn't whether he lived up to the standard in year one. It's whether he will live up to the standard in year two. Because there is a long track record of Alabama coaches figuring it out to some degree. Even the Mike Duboses, even the Mike Shulas, getting a sense of what that job requires, what it's all about. Maybe not feeling comfortable the second time around, but not being as overwhelmed in their second season and showing improvement. The last 6 Alabama football coaches, from Bill Curry through Nick Saban, all won at least 2 more games in their second season than they won in their first season. Saban, of course, tops the list. He won 5 games more in 2008 than he did in 2007. They went from 7-6 to a 12-0 regular season. And then, as I mentioned, they lost to Florida in the SEC championship game. They were a fourth quarter away from playing for a national title. And then they lost to Utah in the Sugar Bowl. Huge improvement. And that told us what was to come with Alabama under Nick Saban. Gene Stallings, who lost his first 3 games as the Alabama coach, which is not a prescription for a happy household or sleepful, restful nights. He went from 7 wins in his first season to 11 in his second year with the Crimson Tide. And he'd been there. He'd been an assistant coach there under Bear Bryant. So he knew what the territory was all about. And still, it took him time to get things figured out. But when he did, next thing you know, they're in the SEC championship game in year 3, and they win the national championship by embarrassing the University of Miami. So what is the standard for Kalen DeBoer this year? I think it's pretty clear. The minimum standard is going to be playoff. We heard Hugh Freeze talk about his belief. He said he truly believes, he doesn't just believe, he truly believes that Auburn is going to be in the playoff discussion. Note the distinction. He said playoff discussion. He didn't guarantee a playoff berth. He didn't say playoff or bust, which was wise of him, because it will be an upset if Auburn does reach the 12-team playoff this season. Won't be an upset if they improve their win total, if they actually have a winning season for the first time in 5 years, if they're more competitive, if they actually beat someone they're not supposed to beat, like a Georgia or an Alabama. But he didn't predict they will be a playoff team. But he did raise the bar. Bold move. We'll see if it works out for him. But Kalen DeBoer didn't say it. He did say they didn't live up to the standard last year because they didn't make the playoff. They were on the cusp. They were on the edge. They got bumped out by Clemson, kicking that last-second field goal, winning the ACC championship game, and earning an automatic berth. And then Alabama, being ranked behind SMU, gave the ACC 2 teams in and the SEC only 3. And Alabama was relegated to the ReliaQuest Bowl, where they didn't actually show up, not in spirit, and got beat by a mid-Michigan team. So this year for Kalen DeBoer, look, he's not on the hot seat. He's not going to be on the hot seat. He's not going to be fired if they don't make the playoff, unless there is a complete and utterly unpredictable implosion in Tuscaloosa, unless the stars align in the wrong way, unless sunspots blind Ryan Williams during games, unless Ty Simpson isn't what they think he's going to be. And by the way, isn't that interesting? Every time since the end of spring practice, since Ryan Grubb, the new offensive coordinator, who's reuniting with Kalen DeBoer, they were kind of a Batman and Robin duo earlier, and then Grubb took a detour. Rather than coming to Alabama last year, he couldn't refuse the Seattle Seahawks offer to be their offensive coordinator. That didn't work out so well. He was dismissed at the end of the NFL season, but that could turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to Alabama, because he and DeBoer, they just know each other. They understand each other. They work well together. They develop quarterbacks. They put together great game plans. They make great play calls in critical situations. They certainly did with Michael Penix at quarterback at Washington. But every time since Grubb announced at the end of spring practice that Ty Simpson would be the starting quarterback, and here comes the asterisk, if the season started today. And any time that Kalen DeBoer has been asked that question, up to and including SEC Media Days, he gave the same answer. Ty Simpson would be the starting quarterback if the season started today. The season doesn't start for another month. So makes me wonder, is that a lack of confidence in Ty Simpson? Is it a realistic view of the quarterback battle at Alabama? Is there still a quarterback battle? It certainly suggests so. So it's going to be very interesting to watch preseason camp in Tuscaloosa to see if Ty Simpson does indeed seize the job, win the team. That was always Nick Saban's evaluation of a quarterback competition. Who wins the team? Who do those other guys believe in? Who are they most ready to go to battle with? And if it's Ty Simpson, he's got skills. They've been kind of hidden behind a curtain since he got to Alabama. But kudos to him for not taking the money and running somewhere else, for not looking for greener grass elsewhere, for waiting his turn, not unlike Mac Jones. How good was Mac Jones when he got his chance finally, after Jalen Hurts, after Tua Tagovailoa? When Mac Jones got the chance to be the starting quarterback by winning the job going into 2020, he had to step in for Tua at the end of 2019 because of Tua's injury. Mac Jones was lights out. Mac Jones was a big part of Alabama winning the national championship in 2020, which, by the way, is the last time that Alabama won the national championship 5 years ago. Now, for most programs, they would still be dancing in the streets if they had won a national title 5 years earlier. At Alabama, that's called a drought. Not winning a national championship in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, that's a drought. Not making the playoff in 2024 or 2022, for that matter, that's a drought. That's not living up to the Bama standard. So that is what Kalen DeBoer and this Alabama team are charged with doing this year, at the minimum. Doesn't matter what the SEC Media Day poll said, picking Alabama third with only 29 first-place votes, while Texas got 96 and Georgia got 44. That doesn't matter at the end of the day, or it won't matter at the end of the season. But let me leave you with a bright spot, a sunspot, if you will, some encouragement, and a reason to believe that this season will be much different than last season, that Alabama will not fall on its face against teams like Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, that Kalen DeBoer will figure it out, the way that every Alabama coach going back to Bill Curry figured it out at least in a better fashion in his second season. In his second years, and we forget sometimes, Kalen DeBoer, while he's been a head coach for a while, he has not been a coach in the football bowl subdivision for very long. At Fresno State in 2020, and there's an asterisk by this, that was the year of COVID. His team only played 6 games. They went 3-3. The next year, they went 9-3. So that's a 6-win improvement. Again, they didn't play the full complement of the schedule in 2020, but still, that's a nice leap forward. At Washington, in Kalen DeBoer's first year, he started out strong. They went 11-2. They got even better the next year. They went 14-1. They made the playoff. They reached the national championship game. They took out Steve Sarkisian and Texas in the national semifinals. And then they came up short in that national championship game. But again, Kalen DeBoer has while brief, while short, it is a track record of improvement in year 2. And that dovetails with Alabama coaches improving in year 2 by at least 2 wins. If Alabama wins 11 this year, they'll be in the playoff. Maybe they'll lose in the playoff. Maybe they'll lose their first playoff game. But if they win 11 games, they're going to be in the playoff. And that, more than getting back to the SEC championship game, where Nick Saban was a ridiculous 9-1 at Alabama. He was 2-0 there with LSU. The man has 11 SEC championships. 9 of those came at Alabama, and he was 9-1 in that championship game. And that only loss that we referenced earlier was in 2008 to Urban Meyer, Tim Tebow, and the Florida Gators. So this is the year for Kalen DeBoer to truly put a stamp on the Alabama program. And look, he's not going to do it by force of personality. As you heard in that clip, if you watched him at media days, if you've ever heard him speak in public, he is not the forceful, commanding presence that Nick Saban is. He's calm, collected, humble, down to earth, seems a little shy, doesn't necessarily inspire you to run through a brick wall when you hear him give a speech. But the man's won a lot of football games for a reason. And you don't do that at podiums at media days. It is interesting, though, that the coach that generated the greatest buzz at media days over the last week was not Kalen DeBoer, was not Hugh Freeze, although a lot of people talked about his playoff discussion prediction. It wasn't Eli Drinkwitz trying to be Shane Gillis and falling short. It wasn't Steve Sarkisian. It wasn't Mike Elko. It wasn't Billy Napier, again, who will not ever rank in the top 10 of dynamic speakers among college football coaches. The coach who made the most news, who got the most discussion, created the most buzz, wasn't even there. He's not even coaching in the league anymore. It was one Nicholas Saban. When Greg McElroy, former Alabama quarterback, the first Alabama quarterback under Nick Saban to preside over a national championship team, suggested, based on someone he had talked to, that Nick Saban is not done coaching. And then, of course, every coach that paraded to the podium for the first couple of days had to answer a question, what they thought. Lane Kiffin said, yeah, he's not done. Kirby Smart said, please. That's not even his decision. That's his wife, Miss Terry's decision. And if you're going to turn to a former Nick Saban assistant for insight into the boss, you're going to listen much more quickly to Kirby Smart than you will Lane Kiffin. And then the best source of all, Saban's daughter, Kristen, she went on Instagram, I believe, on her Instagram story yesterday, and basically threw water on the whole idea that her dad was going to return to coaching. said it's not happening. But the fact that the very rumor, the very suggestion, the very thought that Nick Saban, who's going to be 74 on Halloween, which means he would be 75 if he returned to coaching a year from now in the middle of the season, would return to a sideline, whether it's in college, whether it's in the NFL, whether it's in flag football at a local high school. It's kind of absurd. But with Nick Saban, I guess you never say never. But Nick Saban wasn't at media days. He didn't dominate the room by his presence. He lit it up just by, again, the suggestion that he might coach again. But the opportunity is there this year for Kalen DeBoer. Put your stamp on the program. Show people that you are not just a caretaker, that you are not the bridge to the guy after the guy who's going to lead Alabama back to glory. If Kalen DeBoer is the coach that Greg Byrne believes he is, and Byrne, of course, is the Alabama AD, who quickly focused on and hired Kalen DeBoer after Saban's retirement announcement a year ago. If he's going to be that guy, if he's going to be the guy, this needs to be the year that he shows that. This needs to be the season that he returns Alabama to the Bama standard. Can he do it? I wouldn't bet against him. All right, that's going to do it for me, Kevin Scarbinsky, here on the SEC Sidelines Network. Make sure you turn in to all the great shows on this network. Buddy Martin, Rob Brown, Lauren Meadows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So many great shows, so much great insight, all pulled together by the best executive producer on the planet, Brendan Martin. Brendan, thank you for all your help today, especially dealing with this weather. I think we actually made it from start to finish. You guys have a great weekend. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. Until next time, see ya.